So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 10:15 on the dot, and welcome to day 3 of PASA's International Payments Conference. Now, we are on the one of the second sessions on day 3, and this is about security in an interconnected world. So, ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 days, we've heard from various speakers, and I guess I've seen that this has been very interesting because the speakers have actually mentioned a lot of interesting topics and deliberations within what we've themed as PASA as a future reimagined. And one of the things that I've heard that were mentioned continuously were the words collaboration, the importance of people in payments, whether it be the new PIB and open banking, how we collaborate as an industry. And this also refers to what the SAB in their Vision 2025 highlights as one of the critical success factors, because they say collaboration is important if we need to progress in terms of where we are going within the payments industry. Now, one of the things that they've mentioned as a key success factor is the need for sound risk management for all payment systems. And there's a goal related to that that talks about financial stability and security. So if we think about a future reimagined, we cannot leave out the importance of security in that future. Because if the payment systems are not secured, then it has an impact on trust. It has a ripple effect on other elements of reputation, conduct, and how the consumers, or what Hammond referred to as prosumers, foresee this payment systems and the trust that they can have in it. So, ladies and gentlemen, today I've got on the panel two experts in terms of security, and we're going to have a good deliberation about how do we ensure that we protect the payment systems, and how do we ensure that the consumers out there that utilize the systems can trust them. We can have financial stability, we can maintain it, we can actually make sure that South Africa does not get left behind in terms of how we secure our payment systems. So on the panel today, I've got Frank Versmessen, who's from Swift. He's the head of customer security and CSP programs from Swift. And the CSP program, those of you who know it, it was introduced to support customers to make sure that we drive industry-wide collaboration and fight cyber fraud. And it's one of the best frameworks that Swift has come up with, and we've seen a lot of companies benefiting from that. So Frank has got a broad, he might look young, but he's been within the space for long, and he's got a broad experience, whether it be from Swift, and he was also even within the equities and fixed income portion of things. So we'll hear from Frank and hear about his experience and how we can enhance security as we envision this new future within the payment systems. Then we've got James Devoy. James has got over 25 years experience as an IT and information security expert. For the last 15 years, James has been respected globally because he's been a leader in advising some of the companies, the merchants, the acquirers, in terms of how they can enhance their security and make sure that as we embark on this journey to secure the payment systems, we can do it in a frictionless manner as much as possible. So we'll hear from our two experts then. Now, what I want to mention, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we think about security, we need to understand that it cannot be seen as a competitive advantage, because the criminals or the fraudsters out there are looking for the easiest weakness within the system. And if they can see that it's easier to defraud, whether it be a consumer, a bank, a non-bank, they would actually come head on. So that is why we've seen the importance of collaboration in making sure that we are combined, we have a combined effort in fighting fraudsters and the security threats that are facing the payment systems. So one of the things that we need to think about is that this is a global issue. South Africa, we have it as an issue globally. There are a lot of companies that are experiencing security challenges and fraud challenges, and attackers are actually even evolving in terms of how they come up with new threats and new ways to defraud unsuspecting customers and companies out there. Now, that brings us to the first question that I would like us to tackle. We need to understand what the criminals are up to before they can actually target as many companies or countries as possible. So that is why an understanding of the trends in fraud is very important. So now, James, I would like to find out from you, what are the big threats, trends that you've seen in terms of fraud and cybersecurity that are currently impacting on payments? And how do you foresee these changing in the next 5 years? And also, when you're tackling that, we need to understand what types of fraud do we need to get a better handle on going forward? Because if we don't, we might see that either there might be an impact on trust within the payment systems or the reputational aspects that can come with it. So what are your thoughts around that? Let me hand over to you, James.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a great start to the day. So I think that the answer depends on who you focus on. Recently the European Payments Council have said that malware is still the most prevalent issue for companies. However, they noted that they were seeing a huge shift towards social engineering attacks, especially on the person, especially CEO, CFO type attacks. So I think you have to look at, where is the fraud going to be? Is it going to be perpetrated at the infrastructure, at the payment company, or is it going to be more focused on the person? And one of the reasons why that there has been a shift towards the person is probably the risk and reward. A few years ago, Neera Jones at Barclaycard coined the phrase industrialization of cyber attacks. And industrialization of cyber attacks needs a good risk reward. Over the past few years, we've been pretty good at encrypting, tokenizing, basically devaluing data to the point where inside systems it's hard to get much value. So ransomware has become the kind of top threat according to Europol recently. But I would say that there are three key areas to look at over the coming years. And the first of those is mobile. There are now over 5 billion mobile devices in the world, many of them in the hands of the young, the elderly, and the technically challenged. We're trying to build in frictionless payment at all times. I can't remember the last time I used a PC to check my bank details. With open banking, I now have everything in one app. That's scary. If someone gets a hold of my credentials, my authentication codes, my activation codes, they can really do a lot of damage. There's been a lot of work done on looking at risks of mobiles in the past couple of years, and actually something like 40% of all mobile applications have issues and problems. Back a couple of years ago, there was a piece of malware that infected WhatsApp, and it actually allowed the hackers to make a phone call to a WhatsApp number without the number being answered, and it allowed them to take control of the device. Cameras, geolocation activity, etc. It's not just the devices. Experian have predicted that there will be a major wireless carrier hacked over the next few years. A CBC News investigation also was able to show that they could hack a wireless device via the carrier. So we have to be really careful about how we embrace the mobile technology, especially in developing nations. Advanced persistent threats is the second thing. These are threats quite often done by state-funded actors. We live in a world where terrorism is becoming economic terrorism as well. State-funded actors are looking to bring down world economies in their opposing nations. Advanced persistent threats are very good at getting past all the protection we've got, including things like next-gen firewalls. So we have to be very, very careful, and we have to think about those attacks that are sitting inside of our networks for months and possibly years on end gathering information. We have to look at being really good at coding, really good at securing things from the beginning. And that brings me on to my last one in the time we have today. We could talk about a lot if we had more time, but that's about operations and cost reduction. More and more people are moving to the cloud. If you think about an old-fashioned business, the business was designed to be a long business, to last for many, many years to come. Now, we have loads of startups in the payment industry, and they're all trying to be acquired. all trying to set up a business that in 1 or 2 or 3 years' time, they can be acquired for a vast sum of money. So what they're doing is concentrating on the bottom line, concentrating on the EBITDA, concentrating on the profit. That means that they could be skimping on security, on the technology, on the coding. They could be looking at outsourcing very massive parts, if not all, of their environment. Now remember, those third parties that we outsource to, they don't have the same ethos. They're not always as concerned as we are about the security. They are also more concerned about the value from that outsourcing contract. So I think mobile, outsourcing, advanced persistent threats are areas that we really need to consider going forward.
Thank you. I fully concur with that, James. Now, Frank, from Swift, I think Swift has been at the forefront in terms of trying to identify the threats that a lot of entities that utilize your products might actually be prone to. So would you like to add something to what James has spoken about?
Very briefly, because I mean James hit all the right points. Obviously, I think from a Swift point of view, yes, the advanced persistent threats. Obviously, that's the weak spot of our industry. I mean, 0-day issues are going to be around for forever. Actually, as long as software is being developed, as long as we don't get a solution around that, then we're going to see exploits of those 0-day issues. So that's by far the biggest. And the third topic that James brought up, which is about supply chain, obviously, that for sure must be the biggest headache for our industry right now, because we're all using Microsoft, we're all using certain platforms, and we see the same vendors reappearing in throughout our ecosystem, and that's really where we need to be concerned about, need to have a solution around as an industry. I think I'll end with a positive message on this particular point, if you don't mind. As part of our program, we obviously also look at compliance. So we ask all of our endpoints to say, okay, once a year, how are you doing as far as the controls is concerned, the CSP controls is concerned, and how are you doing? If you measure up, if you compare total compliance with actual hacks that happened, I think the line I want to put out here is that if you were completely compliant, really completely compliant, you did not get hacked. Okay, there were trials, of course, and they were trying to get in, but they didn't get in. And I think that's a really crucial answer here. I want to say, okay, yes, there are big trends, there are big threats, and so forth. If you did your protection correctly, if you had your basic cyber hygiene, if you had fence after fence after fence after fence, because that's what it's all about. It's just not one fence, multiple fences, then you're able to control your system pretty good.
Thank you, Frank. Now, next, let's talk about the consumer, or what Professor Hermansen referred to as the prosumers. There's a customer at the end of a payment system, and I guess in a world where we encourage faster, more accessible, open, and more convenient payments, how do we think about trust and security without compromising that customer experience? Frank, what are your thoughts around this?
Great question, Naniki. And while I'll be speaking more from the B2B angle, there's certainly a couple of views here that can be lifted over into the retail world. When it's about trust and establishing trust, it's really about doing work upfront. And that means that you want to make sure that the person that you're dealing with, either if it's your client or if it's your counterpart, that you have an established relationship with that person, and that you can actually set that up. So typically in a B2B world, you have some sort of remote management application that allows you to establish that trust. It's basically like a handshake you would do on Facebook, right? You wouldn't send any money to a stranger on Facebook, but if you've befriended them, then that is fine. Another point, of course, is that you're going to, when you do your counterparty risk management or you know how to deal with, you're going to take certain things into account. You know how the other person works. You might even, as a bank, you want to model that, and I know that's being used. That user is typically always very responsive. Is always using that type of phone, or is using from a PC. That user is typically working in those type of hours and so forth. Even how quickly they're clicking, how they're typing could be used as a measurement. So those are the type of things that can happen. So I want to, so those are the things that you can model upfront. And then so when you've got all that, so if you get that pre-trust established through through the relationship management, through to knowing the counterpart, then you go into the real-time mode, because of course, I mean, and we'll get to that later on, I guess, we have this very interesting balance between we want to remove friction as much as possible, right, to make the experience fantastic. In the future, it could be, I mean, you touch something and automatically it's paid for because there's a chip in your finger, for example, that allows you to do that. We're not there yet, but we want to remove friction. I think that's for sure. And on the other hand, ensuring that everything happens in a very, very secure way, in a safe way. You have to put in some checks and controls and balances. So therefore, coming back to the question. Doing your homework up front, do a lot of things. So to know who's the counterparty in a B2B or in a retail world. And then when you go into the real payment, I think things like pre-validation are very important. So, I mean, when a payment is being sent, that before it's really being sent, you put everything, there's like a check, there's a test, is the route working okay? Is the end account okay? Are all the data that we need to actually perform the payment, is that all right? And then finally, and then of course the execution of the transaction can go much quicker. I don't think I need to state here that things that are very, very obvious are things like two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication even. They're very, very elegant mechanisms out there these days. I'm living in Belgium, and for example, a great way they have got a like sort of national system here whereby you can authenticate yourself once based on your own EID or your or even via your bank. And once that is installed on your phone, then automatically wherever you have to authenticate yourself, be it your bank, being it the government, being it even a commercial supplier, if they linked into the system, which is called, by the way, It's Me. So just to say, hey, it's me, all right? Then they send a request to this independent, trusted, 100% safe third party. You open application, you say, hey, this bank or whatever wants to get access to your details. Is that normal? It wants to do a payment for you. Is that okay? You say, of course, you have to do your PIN code and everything. You say, okay, it goes back, and automatically that gives you that extra bit of authentication. So I think it's a combination, in short, of doing a lot of things up front to make sure that the relationship exists and you know it's secure, and then at the time of actual execution ensure that you can use that enabled trust and make the rest happen as quickly as possible.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Frank. Now, James, when we talk about the other aspect of the normal, what we call the layman consumers that have a broader knowledge in terms of security, and I think we've heard some of the speakers talking about consumer awareness and making sure that they understand their accountabilities and stuff. Would you like to add to that in terms of how do we bring in these consumers and normal men in the street in terms of understanding their responsibilities, and as we embark on enhancing, having faster payments, RPP, how do we make sure that we do all of that without negatively impacting them?
Yeah, yes, definitely, and some good points there, Frank. We've been trying for years to educate consumers and users on security, and it's not working. It's just not working. We try to educate. We run very expensive internal awareness campaigns. We have posters all over the walls, and people keep clicking the wrong things. We have to get better. I liked what Frank was saying there about the third party that you trust. The third party that can come to you and say, hey, do you want to connect to this? I think we really do need to simplify security. In my view, we lose the word security. We lose the whole concept of security. We just think about, how easy it is to get into Facebook. People do that. They don't realize the security behind that. I think we just have to continue doing that. I like the concept of establishing trust. We have so many things. When I sit in a chair talking, I tend to have my head at a tilt. It's just a habit. It's a habit for me. My head sits like this. My facial expressions act in a certain way. My hands act in a certain way. There's so much information that we can pick up from people's behavioral traits by the way if they're moving, by the way they walk, if they talk, the way they inflect their voice, if the facial expressions. That Frank talked about the typing speeds. There are so many things we do that are very unique to us. We have the processing power to do that now. Inside most devices, there's more processing power than we had in PCs 5 years ago. 5 billion devices out there. We have a tool in our hand every day that enables us to authenticate in a much better way. And that's where I think that we'll have to go with that. We have to go with the most simplistic, the easiest way that consumers look at without constantly trying to talk about security. I think 25 years of doing that hasn't got us anywhere. Let's just put the trust, and it's a two-way trust. They have to trust us that we trust them. And I think that's the future, definitely.
Yes, very, very, I think the consumer simplicity trust are very, very key components of that. Now that brings us to the promise of a more inclusive payment system that we can provide. We've seen previously payments were mainly provided by banks, and we've seen the emergence, and actually it has now become a norm that the non-banks are now playing into the space and adding a lot of innovation products that consumers are appreciating out there. Now, does the promise of a more inclusive payment system provide the opportunity for a greater collaboration between the banks and the non-banks when it comes to fighting fraud and also facilitating those secure payments that we need to ensure that we have trust within the system? James, what are your thoughts around that?
I started my car a few days ago. I went out to the car, I turned the key on, the car asked me for money. In effect, the car wanted an update for its software, its Apple Play software, and it basically says if you pay us $9.99, you can have a year's free updates. That's where we're going to be looking to go. More and more devices, more and more entrants to the market looking for payment channels. Our fridges, our microwaves, everything's going to be asking for money at some time in the near future with the whole concept of Internet of Things. The payment industry is changing dramatically. We're looking at the Apple Pays and the Google Pays, and these guys are applying for bank licenses. They're going to be looking at a whole new way of doing things. So on one hand, we have a new entrance to the market. We have new financial institutions. But I think if we're looking to fighting fraud, we have to look at other aspects, like the government aspects, across the world. A few years ago, we had a concept of safe harbor with the US where we could transfer data. We had to become globalized in our fighting fraud. We really have to stop this mentality of country-specific, security. Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield were torn apart by illegal cases by a chap called Schrems, who basically was able to put those two reasonably good models aside. We now live in a world where we're having to build multiple data centers because we can't transfer data from Europe to America, for example, and that just seems to be getting worse. So we really have to think about that. The European Banking Association recently, published some guidelines along those lines around, fraud reporting, understanding and sharing more accurate fraud figures. We have to get better at sharing information. So I think the relationship's not just about the banks and non-banks. I think it's banks, non-banks, it's the new payment entrants, and it's the governments. And to me, the governments and the government are key. You know, the European Payment Council, they've recently established a new group on fraud within the kind of single European payments area. And they are trying to facilitate, you know, the sharing of fraud data collection analysis. You know, PSPs need to start working together. Payment service providers need to really start working together. Forget competitive advantage. They need to get together to prevent fraud. You know, if a PSP picks up what they think's a fraudulent transfer, share that information, because they might not know for certain that's a fraud. But if another PSP sees similar activities, you can start building a better picture. You know, Europol and European Banking Federation, you know, have an initiative that involves over 500 banks and financial institutions. And back in 2020, you know, just a year ago, in its 6th year of activities, they actually identified over 4,000 money mules, and they actually found that they prevented around about 35 million euros of potential loss. 420 odd people were arrested as part of that activity, and that was a great example of sharing between banks and non-banks. That information really helped the money laundering and the money mules aspect of our industry. So we just have to get better cross-border communication. We have to find a way to get around these safe harbor and privacy shield type problems. We have to start, back to Frank's conversation, we have to start trusting each other better. You know, data is important, yes, but until we get a global view of data, a global understanding of data security and risk, until we can open up aspects of our data to each other and share that data, until we do that, we're going to struggle to fight fraud, because fraud, I said in my earlier topic, is industrialized. It's a lot of it, especially in the payments industry, is done by state actors. A single PSP can't fight China or Russia or any of these nations that is, you know, North Korea. It needs to be a global activity to fight that. And I really do believe that that's the way forward. We just need to be sensible. We just need to sit down. You know, we've got lots of conferences going on for global environmental and global terrorism. We really need to have a global view of payment fraud.
And that's true. That's true, James. And I think what we've seen, especially with the fraud that it starts globally somewhere else, and then it starts to replicate. And it shows the importance of data sharing in terms of having that insight, so that if it starts somewhere, we can understand it, we can unpack it, and we can make sure that we avoid the replication of fraud that can come to other countries or to other industries. And I like that importance of data sharing. Now, I think if I look at what SWIFT has done with their CSP program, it's actually enhanced a lot in terms of making sure that companies, the non-banks, are actually playing a role in terms of enhancing their environment. So I'm just thinking about this from your side, Frank. Is there something that you want to add about this importance of collaboration between the banks and the non-banks?
Sure. I was actually thinking about 3 points. I'll start off with the last one from James, which is all about information sharing, right? I mean, definitely in our community, but also within the banking financial community, which, by the way, includes a lot more than 2,000 corporates now, which are actually on the SWIFT network. We exchange information all the time. So it's actually part of the mandate or part of the joining obligation, if you like, that if there is a breach, then you let us know as soon as possible. SWIFT, we take the information, we will anonymize the information right away, and we will describe how hackers got in, which kind of tools they use, what you should be aware about, which are the new APTs that we've seen, and so forth. Document that, and then we send that out. So we've got our own information as security security portal that allows you to find all the information, you can subscribe to that and so forth. And we don't just do it, back to your point about the non-banks, within the ecosystem and the corporates, but also with other providers. So law enforcement, the virus software builders, other type of uh, vendors or partners that actually are active in the industry. So make them aware, spread the news. It's basically like in a normal world, right? Where you have a virus, where you have an attack, you want to exchange information as quickly as possible so that you know what happens to you. So how you correct your things. So definitely number one, information. The second one I would say is pure innovation. Innovation between banks and non-banks. I believe banks, they have a very important core task to focus on. They have a lot of responsibility. They have to ensure that the money is safe and so forth. They don't or can always act as agile. They can be very agile, but cannot always act as agile. And sometimes these small little entities do have more of that capability. And they can come up with new ways that actually can then be incorporated in the normal, more established world quite quickly. I think innovation is clearly an area. And then third one, again, James referred to that as well. If you think purely about security and how can you see cooperation there, if we would have set somebody 10 years ago, I think as long as 10 years ago, that your phone would have the capability to look at you and say, yes, this is Frank, this is Nanika, this is James, or by taking your fingerprint maybe a bit longer around, just on any mobile device with that capability, and that banks or financial suppliers will be able to use that then to do that. That would not be believed at that point. And I think there's more to come there. There's more capabilities to come there. I think there's definitely more innovation from the pure technology side that will make it overall more seamless, and where we can see this cooperation between the banks and non-banks possible. Another example I gave earlier was with the chip in your finger, right? I mean, we've seen a couple of examples of that already in reality. I'm not saying that everybody should get that here, but who knows, may one day, or just in the ring, right? We've seen those type of things as well. So there's some amazing technology things that we can see there that would really help this industry to enable that frictionless payment and still be secure.
Thank you. Those are very interesting comments there, Frank. James mentioned the importance of the government in this whole space and the role that they can play. Now, Frank, do you think policymakers can influence how payment systems are secured and the different strategies that can come up? Because, understanding when a policy or when something is made regulatory, we all have no option but to comply. And we've seen with some of the countries where certain aspects of security are now being regularized. So do you think policymakers can influence payment system security strategies, and how do you think they can do that?
I have a technology background myself. I'm definitely not here to defend the policymakers, but actually when you were saying, Naniki, earlier, we have no other way but to comply. It sounds almost like a bit negative, right? We have to do. I tend to believe that policymakers are there for the good of the industry, for the good of the people, and therefore to come up with ideas and proposals and legislation and even regulation that makes this a better world. I know these are big words, but I'm thinking specifically about it in the context of a piece of legislation that we've seen in Europe a couple of years ago. James referred to it earlier. It's so Payment Services Directive number 2. You had a 1, had a 2 that went so much further and really had a positive influence on the innovation. We saw a number of players out there already that were providing certain services. We call them payment initiation service providers or account information service providers that were providing a dashboard for you across multiple banks. They were in a bit of a legal vacuum, if you like, that there wasn't really any control on them. And that's what this legislation allowed to do to really make sure that yes, they could exist, if you like, and they were recognized, but at the same time, and I think very, very important, it's a two-way street. It's not just, okay, you can come in if you and you can get recognized and you can get established as a player, but also because you get established as a player, it means that you're going to have to fulfill these and these and these requirements to make sure that there's no tilting playing field, that the banks have to do all the hard work and these new nimble players can get off easily. So again, that sounded negative, but that they can just ignore security, let's put it this way, because again, that's by far the biggest thing issue that I see, is that we talked about supply chain already. The third parties out there, definitely new players that are not used to the industry, that might take certain things very light, and that's what we need to be careful for. So back to legislation, recognizing new type of players, but equally also enforcing technology, although that's not part of the legislation itself, it's part of the regulation that came afterwards. Things like multi-factor authentication. How do you safely store your credentials? How do you ship credentials in a safe manner? When do you need to ask for additional security elements, and when it's fine? Those type of things are, surprise, surprise, very actually specific in the regulation. They also give a lot of possibilities for people how to implement it. They don't say technically how to do it, but the big principles are there. And I think that's really where I can see the role of policymakers. They needed to give a little nudge, sometimes a little nudge, to the established industry to start moving it again, but at the same time ensuring that the newbies, that they are playing by the rules. I think that's one example I wanted to give. The other example is a very obvious one, of course, is everything around network information systems, the directive that we've seen. And by the way, I used an acronym earlier. I used RMA. RMA stands for Relationship Management Application. So it's about the trust thing. But back to so we've got security legislation that come in that also make it sure that critical service providers do have to step up. They can't be just playing by the normal rules. No, they have to go the extra mile. They have to be looked after. They are supervised or overseen and so forth. So yes, I think from that point of view, policymakers, sometimes it might seem, back to your point, Naniki, a bit like painful, but in the end, I mean, let's hope it's all good for the good. It should feel like it's for the good. And I think by them opening up, making the market easier, and at the same time ensure that security is respected, I think they can help us.
Yes, that's true. And I guess we have seen regulators abroad and even locally playing a very good role in terms of doing that. The big question is, are regulations and legislations growing at the same pace as all this innovation that we're seeing? So, but that's a question for another day. Now, I just want us to come back to, I see we left with 8 minutes. I guess all of us are worried about, we are trying to reshape a future. We have a future that we reimagined, and we've seen so much development in terms of payments and all these role players that are coming in. At the end of the day, security has to be intertwined in terms of the role that it plays within the payments industry. Now, Frank and James, what are the biggest security concerns that you see in terms of us reshaping our payment systems, the infrastructure, and making sure that we don't get left behind in terms of developments in the payment systems, but also being cognizant of the security concerns that come with innovation? Let me start with you, James.
For me, the biggest paradigm shift in payments, and we heard some speakers during the past few days discuss it, is distributed ledgers, blockchain and crypto. I remember coming to this event 3 or 4 events ago, and I spoke about blockchain, and people were saying, "What's blockchain?" It's in a short space of 6 or so years. It's been around. it was on everyone's tongues, and then it disappeared. It kind of went dead. But it really is still here, and it's starting to really have an impact. Distributed ledgers are going to really offer us a new way to to organize, to trust and manage payment systems. It's going to be a real time. It really enables cross-border payments. Give you a great example. One of my colleagues on the call today, Greg. If I happen to owe Greg some money, I've got a choice to send that money via the normal banking system and pay money on that transfer and lose out on that transfer. However, I could send Greg some Bitcoin. Or I could go onto a ledger here, an exchange here. I could buy $1,000 worth of any coin that Greg liked, and I can send Greg that coin. Greg can receive that £1,000 in seconds, $1,000 in seconds, with no real cost. There is a small cost, but no real cost. So we're going to have to really embrace that world of crypto payments. The regulators are really struggling. Back to Frank's point about policymakers, the regulators are really struggling to work in this environment. I have a crypto portfolio, and it dropped massively 2 days ago because the Chinese once again banned crypto currency purchases within China. We've got the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission in the US, banning sales of a crypto called XRP, which is because they don't. There's a massive misunderstanding of how the payments industry will be affected by crypto. We're looking at decentralized finance. We're looking at the potential to totally disrupt the global, payment and banking worlds. So this is going to really cause us some major security challenges. I don't think it can go away. The bottle's open. It's a $2 trillion portfolio at the moment of crypto out there. I think we have to look at this very carefully. In 2021, I was doing some research yesterday. Between 2020 and 2021, 50 exchanges have been hacked with nearly $3 billion lost US dollars. And last year alone, there was over $310 million US dollars was stolen from exchanges. So we've got an industry that's not regulated very well, but it's an industry that's becoming so integrated into the payments world. We have to really, really get our arms around this and understand this. Stop thinking it will go away. Stop thinking it will not become part of the banking and the payment industry. My view, and this is personally my view, it will become, and we really should consider it, and we have to consider what the security implications of that are.
That is so true. And I guess as we innovate, as we come up with ways to curb or close one security threat, new ones evolve. And I guess that's how it is. So it has to be a continuous fight. Frank, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, if one thinks about the biggest security concerns out there, we already talked about a few, right? The supply chain issues is definitely a big one. The APTs and so forth, and the new technologies like James was referring to. We are looking, if you think about the black swan situations, I think that's where we think we need to really worry about. Like we mentioned already a couple of times, the guys, the threat actors here, they're not the guys in the hoodies, okay? I mean, yes, there are a few like that, but we are talking about massive industries. I mean, there's one particular country, I think it's quite well documented, it has an army of over 6,000 people right now, and they're working from all over the world to try to infiltrate in the banking system and try to extract money from the normal world. And I think they becoming more ferocious, they're becoming more dangerous, and the big danger, of course, if they are succeeding in bringing a whole country down. bringing really what would call in South Africa big game hunting, right? I mean, they bring down and the payments infrastructure and the biggest banks and so forth all in one go. That would be really, really dangerous because you could really freeze a whole country or even region with that. So when I think what is my worst nightmare, then definitely it, because then forget about as a retail person, it's back to cash at that point.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. You know, there's a phrase being coined as cyber crime as a service. That's what Frank was discussing. You know, that we're now having people with very little skills who don't have the hacking skills. It's no longer the script kiddie in the bedroom. It's now a criminal entity. It's a criminal person who doesn't understand anything to do with security or crypto or payments, but can go out there and can use things like the anonymity of crypto to pull together a team. You know, like the movies you see when they pull together a bank heist team, they can pull that team together. They've got the specialists, and one of the areas that they can do is look into the supply chain process. You know, one of the big things now is about embedding code into the devices that manufacture. You know, ATM machines, POS machines, other devices as we go along. Look at the problems with the Huawei 5G network in America and the UK, where there was a fear of the Chinese government had hacked into the wireless network. You know, we really have to, you know, what keeps me awake is probably cybercrime as a service. I'm not trying to defeat one or two people now. I'm trying to defeat very professional people who will happily put 5 or 10 million or more dollars into the pot to buy the skills and the resources required. And they have a method of getting that money back to those people. So for me, you know, that's the biggest risk.
Yes,
How do we defeat that with our limited budgets?
Exactly. And I think that's where the importance of collaboration as an industry comes into play, because to get to understand the insight in terms of where do this come about. The criminals are not just acting there, sitting in different or sitting in their own small space. It's a syndicate of criminals that are targeting companies, and they are always trying their luck in terms of breaching some of the controls that are there. And unfortunately, until we collaborate and come up with a better way to handle this is going to be continuous. And we've seen how we innovate. Innovation is moving ahead, but the question is our security moving at the same level as the innovation that we have? And plus other regulators, you know, the regulatory instruments that are coming in there also moving at the same level. I guess, you know, we are reimagining a new future, and we are hoping that we're going to move into this new future with collaboration in mind, with making sure that as we enhance our payment systems, we actually consider security. We don't leave that as an afterthought. It has to be thought about from the forefront, because the criminals out there are not sleeping. You know, it's a global problem. It's continuing. It's now become cybercrime as a service. You know, that's a very concerning thing if you think about it. But as an industry, we need to make sure that we have a handle on this. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of time. Frank and James, it's been quite a very interesting discussion we've had. And there's so much. I guess we can't stop when we talk about security and risk management and compliance and all those aspects. We can speak for days and days. But unfortunately, we've definitely come to the end of our session, and we are actually 3 minutes ahead of time. So James, thank you so much for participating in the session. Very insightful discussions we've had. And Frank, I guess coming from Swift, I always say they are always at the forefront in terms of security. James, your experience assisting those companies in terms of tackling fraud and cybercrime has added a lot of value within the industry. So gentlemen, thank you so much for forming part of this. And I guess, ladies and gentlemen, everyone on the call, this is it. And thank you so much for joining us today.